That will not be me. I will play my champions. I will play aggressively. Maybe I'll die. I don't care. And I fully love that, especially because we've had so much history, so much footage of teams doing the opposite and then slowly crumbling. So I just like that he went out, playing his champions, take that Olaf, get in there, give me a volley bear pick too, even though it didn't work out. Bonus points.
Oh, it's a bit sad that he had to like go out with Godby though instead of Gods. Like that gave me some 2015 flashbacks that I did not want. I did not want that.
The last thing before we move on, like for the TL side, the only thing I will say is I was definitely sad to see how they came in versus how they went out, because the T1 series, or T1, I should say game, wasn't series, was so exciting for the people and gave them so much hope. And from everything I've heard, and from the Rainover interview and the Yoshiki interview, and Rainover talked about the team was having a lot of issues after they lost the energy, and it just felt like the players really looked past that matchup because they were feeling really confident going into T1, and then they almost beat them. And I think they kind of looked at energy as, well, this is going to be easy. It's just energy. We almost beat T1, so like this is going to be kind of a joke. Yeah. And then they got clapped by energy, and definitely, you know, Rainover is alluding to the issues that they had and the problems that they were having after that match. It's like, well, clearly there was a lot of inner turmoil and a lot of issues going on, and there was a lot of rumors about that, that they were having a ton of problems going into the GAM series. So I kind of felt like, you know, having heard some of that stuff, if they were to lose one game, then they were probably going to lose the series, because if you're not in a good spot, you know, mentally, and your team's already arguing, then that's going to be tough. And I feel like that was apparent. So that's the thing that feels the worst about the way TL exited. You know, BDS, you know, you guys said you were happy for them to just make it through play-ins, but I think the expectations got raised for TL after they had that really good first game. Yeah. And they were definitely favorites against GAM. They should have been able to beat GAM if they played to their level. So it's definitely disappointing, and you know, it's a tough way to go out. Obviously, the rookies I think are getting a lot of flack, APA and Jan. APA obviously had some really bad games, but he also had some good moments too.
Especially in the first series, APA was the one that really impressed me the most against T1.
His Nico game was also really good. He had a few good ones, but
he got bodied so hard by Palafox though, and
he's got a mental block against that guy, right? Like, that must be the explanation.
The thing is, especially in team sports, if one person gets focused that hard, then it can cause like the other teammates to lose confidence, and that is the worst thing to happen, like that sort of collapse. So
especially if it's a mid lane.
From all these kind of like skirting around the subject, it seems like there was a big bullseye there.
Also, Pioshik even really specifically said, because Ashley Kang asked, why didn't you pick Lee Sin, you know, in the first 3 picks in that final game? Because he said, after game 1, you know, I could tell the rookies were really, really nervous, and I was planning to play supportive jungle style, but I realized, okay, I need to carry, because people are nervous. They're not playing like themselves. And so he went to the Kindred, and he said, you know, why didn't you go for the Lee Sin then in game 3? And he said, well, we were worried about, you know, APA's champion pool. APA can play a lot of different stuff, but obviously there's a difference between being able to play a lot of different stuff and being confident in it on the world stage. So, you know, maybe that's just Pioshik's point of view, maybe that's the whole team's point of view. That's hard to say, because it is just one man's opinion, but at least he said that's why they left his jungle pick till later, and how he ended up on Sejuani. But, you know, also, to be fair to APA, he played less than half a split in LCS, and then was able to different language. Literally everyone is speaking Korean on the team. He's like the one, which is really funny for an LCS team, not gonna lie. But I think, you know, his first foray into pro is pretty impressive.
No, I would 100% agree.
I also just want to say, as much they're getting so much flack from the community, as much as fans are, you know, angry and disappointed, the team, to your point, is way 100 times more disappointed. We say this every time we get eliminated, but especially for Team Liquid, they also had been gaining so much confidence internally because of the success that they started happening. And that's kind of why it hurts so much to see this kind of downfall, and they did not hit their own expectations. So yeah, definitely feel bad for them. Whereas, you know, for the BDS side, it feels a little bit more uplifting because they did accomplish a lot of stepping stones. I feel like, you know, smashing Golden Guardian, then making it through play-ins. You know, they have some positive things to look at, whereas TL didn't hit a lot of these positive notes first.
Plus, losing to DK feels expected, where losing to GAM is not expected, so it just feels way worse, right? Because it feels like, ooh, you got this good draw, you didn't make the most of it. You know, you failed in that situation.
I mean, the Journey one is also just really resonant with me because what DS had JDG.
Yeah. Of anyone in the entire LCS for top lane, and they outplayed them 3 times in a row topside with Levi and Kiaya up there, and
The parallels are
there's
actually
nothing
amazing.
left to say there. Like, you got absolutely outplayed at every turn here in, you know, repeat engages a lot of, you know, on your choices. So, I mean, it feels really good for VCS, you know, and for those players, especially after Levi came to North America and, like, kind of followed in the academy and then, you know, had to go back. It's such a strong, you know, return to the world stage where he made his name.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. I actually see the team as like an archetype of the team very similar to one of your top-heavy teams you don't necessarily have as much of. Here in Worlds, there's a lot of teams that revolve around mid lanes, right? Like you've got Chosen Scout, like Knight, all of these players that are the epicenter of their team. Whereas I think that TL and GAM, and even BDS, like with Adam, but like these are the teams, and then
I knew you were gonna say it. I was in my head like, do I throw caps in there just for the memes?
No, I thought you were just gonna say like, and Broken Blade's obviously the best player.
G2, one of those rare teams that seems to succeed even without a mid laner.
Yeah, actually, it's very impressive. Very
I didn't want to throw it in again because I'm like, oh, I'm on cooldown. I did the last one. So your cooldown's up.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came back. You're next. Yeah, all right, I got it. But I do think that it's cool that like they both met with like a similar play style, and GAM just proved that they're able to compensate better. Like they were able to play that style better.
Should we jump forward to the two?
I reckon we should.
Or do you want to touch about JDG Genji at all before we jump forward?
Oh, I guess we could.
Well, I mean, the beauty of the format, right? So I didn't realize this, but it was insane when Law mentioned it in an interview. JDG and Genji get like a 10-day gap. Like they qualified on day 3, right? Played round 1, the 0-0, 1-0, 2-0, right? And then they now don't play again until quarterfinals.
And they don't play each other unless they get to the final.
Right.
Which is the best part.
Assuming our understanding of the quarterfinals is correct.
Yeah.
Which it should be.
I hope so. Wait,
Yeah.
you're giving doubt now. I was
Yeah, but,
completely
like,
sure of myself
right,
that they're on opposite
they're on-
sides of the
they
bracket.
They should be, yeah.
They're on opposite sides.
I feel like this is the most well-structured tournament as far as tournament favorites, really with that path to meet at the very top that we ever have had. Very often, you know, people will be claiming
2018.
in this tournament, you know, the real finals was this, or the real finals was that. But these are by far the 2 biggest favorites from different regions. So it feels very kind of balanced. And you were even talking about how few upsets there have been until
There's been
yesterday.
There's literally this has felt like the most straightforward group stage of all time that I can remember, because we had what I consider to be 0 upsets in the BO1. Some people were getting at me and saying, oh well, you know, G2. What about G2? Well, I think G2 is good, so
Yeah,
I
agree.
didn't consider G2 beating the 4th seed from LPL and LCK an upset. I thought that was a pretty even match. So to me, that wasn't an upset. But if you want to argue that's upset, sure.
I mean, it was an upset if you go into the Weibo game and you're like there when they're 9,000 goal behind. I'd
Sure,
say
sure,
that at that
but-
point it's an upset.
But expectations go in, right?
100%.
And based on he was very upset. Based on that, there was, and within every regional match, the higher seed won every single time. Every inter-regional match, the team that I expected to win would win. The only exception being GAM versus PS. So that's the only upset that I would have. The only one that I would say is an upset so far. So clearly, you know, the kind of like regional seeding / strength has been correct thus far.
And there are advantages to JDG and Gen G getting out with the 3-0 because then they get matched with the what should be weaker teams theoretically.
The 6, 7, 8.
That are going to have.
Here's what I will say.
Barely.
Like, we're talking about the format in general, right? When I look at the 2-1 group, right? Yeah, but like, maybe we'll have a graphic that'll pop up.
No, it's not gonna help.
I'll just run through.
There might be something edited.
I'll run through the
two.
2-1, but like KT, LNG, right? T1, DLG, NRG, G2. These are all teams in my head that I'm like, I'm fine with them.
They could
being
all
in
win
2-1.
Worlds.
Yeah.
but
I agree.
Um,
Good point, Betty.
But like people will sit there and be like, oh, you know, maybe it should have been. But like, you look at the 4th seed from LCK and LPL, and people will be like, well, they're stronger than the 1st seed from NA and the 1st seed from EU. And I'm like, well, okay, fine. If you want to sit there and debate that, that's okay. But all that means is that those teams, like the 4th seeds from LPL and LCK, should then win in the 1-2. And then the NRG and G2 should lose in the 2-1.
I just love the
energy and
G2 is
G2 are
already
playing.
beaten
Well, I know
both
they
of
are, but
them.
like I'm talking about, like I know I.
That's why it was the Giga Draw for G2.
Why
right?
I agree. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. But it's one of those situations where in my head I'm like, these 2-1s and 1-2s, like they've worked out very nicely, considering when it felt like a lot of the things kind of felt unfair in a way at certain points. Like certain teams had easier roads than others. The fact that the 2-1s and the 1-2s have ended. What? Did you see that someone did this really interesting where like they basically gave each of the teams a rank? Like they gave JDG 16, and then they like slowly went down based on like expected seeding, and they actually even put G2 at like underneath the 4th seeds from LBL and LCK. They were like, just arbitrarily, this is where I'm going to put them for now. G2 had the hardest route based on the equivalent rating.
So they
Well,
just
this
add
is-
up the numbers of the.
It's super fraudulent though, because it's basically saying that like it's if you're saying the total strength, right? So JDG obviously beating BDS is easier,
Yes.
Gen G beating GAM is easier, but there's also the reality of both BLG and T1 are much harder opponents than anyone G2 beats, right? So it's like, so why does it matter if it's like the total points thing doesn't mean anything, right? Because you wouldn't get to the 2-0 match potentially if you had to play.
Yeah, but the
BLG or
argument,
T1.
but the argument is that the current routes the teams have taken, some have taken easier routes than others to get to the 2-0. So like the G2 took an arguably easy routes to get to 2-0 compared to other teams. And I would argue that LNG took easier routes to 2-0 when they had to play both Fnatic and EC9.
Yeah.
I don't think
LNG
G2's
LNG
path has been
definitely.
easy.
And like I think it's also fair to say that like I think it was KT had a horrible.
Yeah.
I was
right?
kind of thinking of it in terms of, at the time, what were the possible draws that they could have gotten.
That's fair.
And
It seemed like, I was like, oh man, they could have gotten some way more difficult
I mean, they
draws.
definitely
Yeah.
could have. I completely
They
agree with that.
they definitely don't have the easiest. I mean, I think both EU and NA have gotten exceptionally good draws.
Whenever we get each other.
Exactly, because that's the reality. Is we both got GAM, and we've gotten a lot of EU and NA. So dodging Eastern teams is just like that's just
What
easier,
was
right? On
someone was
average.
telling me about
Energy
Weibo,
beat
and
Mad
then TL,
and TL.
and then Mad.
Yep.
And then if they beat G2, they will have qualified beating
Only Western teams.
only Western
Western,
team.
yep.
And if they lose and then draw someone like a Fnatic, there's a world that
They could still
they could
qualify.
still,
Yeah.
Yeah. Energy had an incredibly easy route. C9 had pretty hard. T1 and LNG, you know, like that's a pretty hard path. Energy, I would say, had really easy. TL, I would say, had actually really easy after the first one. Their next two was another Western.
But going
team.
down to 0-1 is really rough. So like
It
their
is, it is.
initial draw kind of.
But you got a Western team and the only like non-major region team. So I would still argue like I think
They did
NA
get a
had-
Western team that recently.
Yeah, sure.
So that's
sure.
not great.
But it's still, who would you rather play? We're talking about overall strength. Who would you rather play? Energy or KT?
Yeah.
Or DK? Or you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
right? So it's like I think objectively NA has had really good draws. I think EU objectively has had really good draws. I think beating both DK and Weibo was super impressive from G2. But that's the kind of level that I put them on. But I still think you have to say, in the 2-1 group, this is super lucky draw for G2, because I think G2 are heavily favored over Energy. I expect them to 5 Energy, honestly. And I would say, I don't know what your expectations are, Betty, but to me, there's 5 draws they could have gotten. I would have expected G2 to lose to the other 4.
I disagree with that as well, and I actually think that this is a bad draw for G2 purely because they'll probably clap NRG and people will be saying, oh, it was so easy for them to get in, when I don't think they deserve that at all. I think they should have knocked out one of the other 4
But
teams.
if you win,
I mean,
because
so
I
it's-
think they
it's
can.
one of those
If you
things
win
where,
here,
like,
you dodge JDG and Gen.
the only
so
thing-
it's super beneficial for knockouts.
The only thing for
Because if you think you'll beat those other teams, then they're gonna make semis.
Yeah.
how
Because-
much more do you
because
want to
they
talk about
can't play.
format? Because like I can talk about G2 if you want,
Yeah.
but that to me is like a bigger topic. Where if you want to stick on the format for a little bit longer, I think we should do that. Okay, well then, so G2 then, like, in my opinion, the teams that I would be the most concerned about them getting in this would be T1 BLG. KT and LNG, I think they'd beat both.
I think they could definitely beat KT.
I think
KT doesn't have the stability to
So
handle
my
both.
about them getting in this would be T1 BLG. KT and LNG, I think they'd beat both.
I think they could definitely beat
I
KT.
think-
KT doesn't have the stability to
So
handle
my
it. G2, I don't think.
current
Like I think
opinion,
G2 could beat any of those teams, but I would still favor any of those 4 teams.
but
over
why?
G2.
What about G2 makes them look worse than a KT LNG T1 BLG?
I mean, just the games that they've played here. They've been pretty inconsistent. They've had Baron throws in
oh,
both
they've
the
been
games.
very
They-
consistent actually.
I mean, I think they've shown a lot of problems both in their Weibo game and in their DK game, right? And then
But what
against-
problem?
What problems?
Well-
I mean, against Weibo, they got completely blown
The
out.
initial 9,000
they
gold
shouldn't
gap
have-
was probably a problem.
Yeah,
But
they,
like-
they,
It's an
lost, they had
indicator,
no,
yeah.
they have no objective control on
But
bot side.
their early game
Hansama
was
has
either
shown
even or
huge
head.
champion pool problems, right?
Championship problem.
I mean,
Ooh,
what happened against JDG, or excuse me, against Genji, right? Like they ban out both Kalista and Draven, and he plays Ezreal into Lucian. Like to me, that's super concerning. All the Asian teams are just going to copy this.
I felt
So-
like the drafter. Sorry,
No, you can
just
go.
a quick interject. I felt like that could have been a team decision to be like, hey, we're gonna go into this, giving them Xayah Rakan and utilize these specific strategies for counterpicking. So I don't know if I put that all on Hansama, and maybe
Sure,
that's
but
a
I found it
team-wide decision.
concerning because I feel like coming out of that, everyone was going to try to replicate that. I don't think energy is good enough to punish them, so I don't think it matters. But again, like I think G2 could beat any of those other teams, but I would still favor all of them above them.
So
People
think
are
that
like
the-
way too down on LNG. I think, for example, like people are like LNG looked bad. We want to draw LNG. LNG still took a game off JDG. I still think people are just because they're not as like aggressive and dominant. People are super underrated.
If you think JDG is the best team in the tournament, then you've got to put LNG very close to the like, if not just.
I think they're third still. That was my evaluation at the start.
Yeah,
I just think
Genji,
people
LNG,
are,
I think that makes
people are just down on them because they weren't dominant.
I'll talk about LNG in a second. Because the G2, in my opinion, their early games have been good or neutral. They've been playing well in how they actually build early leads and how they lane. Their issue has always come around how they play around that first Baron, in the fact that, in my opinion, what they do is they like to use Baron as a way to either force TPs or to force a fight, right? And they do it early because they feel that they should play around their first fights as quickly as possible because they like to draft strong winning bot lane 2v2s. The problem is, and I think this has happened twice now, the first time they were indecisive about whether or not they wanted to finish the Baron or turn and fight. In the second Baron, they were again indecisive around whether or not they wanted to finish the Baron or turn and fight. And credit to Weibo, they held their TP so long before actually committing to fighting for the Baron that I felt like G2 ended stuck in this situation where they now we either take a bad fight or we flip the Baron. And then in both instances, they've been able to come back into the game and then win through either incredibly good team fighting, smart macro decisions, or just like finding really good picks. And huge shout out to Mickey, like MVP of G2 in my opinion. Like his Rakan was instrumental in like finding a pick. Like his Renata was also insanely good. The series against Gen G, I think that I agree with you that like there are draft issues, but I don't think the problem is the problem. I don't think like I know for a fact that the champions they walked away with out of their scrims were Kalista, Draven, and Lucian, and they have another one that they have prep that they haven't shown yet. But like Lucian is something that they have had incredibly good scrim records on. So the reason why it comes out, it's one of those like. I think that's a bit of like a hindsight thing where it's like, oh, well, it looks bad because it didn't work out. But that's something that from their perspective, they've practiced a lot. They know can be good and they believe it to be good. The Ezreal, I don't know what the decision making behind that was. And I don't think their drafts were particularly good against Gen G. But in my opinion, I think that Gen G just like has a much more flexible draft pool. I was surprised by how many options they actually had and the way in which they like handled G2 in the draft. And then they're also just like,
I know what.
they're just a much better team.
Yeah, Genji, they picked Rakan, and then it doesn't matter. That's the
Sure.
Genji way.
I guess it's a little bit a matter of philosophy because a lot of people who see G2 kind of look at it as G2 are creating their own problems and then solving them.
Yeah.
So how much credit do you give them for solving a problem that you first
You
created?
don't know the problems that they've solved elsewhere, though. This is the thing, like, because I just want to defend G2 about that draft just a little bit, because I liked that they went in with the Lissandra answer. because
Oh, I
what
actually think the game 1 draft was fun.
Yeah, I thought-
didn't have issue with the game 1.
I thought that was cool, but like the fact that they're contesting, like trying to make sure that they've got the Rakan pick covered, because as soon as they prove that they can
And it
do
worked
that, they
well for
can
them
win
in
the
LEC.
series. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Like they can show Gen G that they don't need to worry about that pick, and then they have initiative in the draft.
Yeah.
They just didn't manage to actually do that. Like the plans to deal with the Rakan just didn't work.
Genji, the only thing I think you could maybe argue is a little bit surprising is like mid lane picks, but besides that, it was like the most standard meta picks, right? They did Zyra Khan, and then Jax Aatrox top lane, and it was Rel, and what was the other one?
But I think that there are certain things that like he was used to like high prior on Jax, rather than surprise them a lot. They don't have a chance for the Jax either. I
Well,
don't think.
there's no way you should be surprised by Jax priority. That
mean,
is, if they watched a single game of LCK or LPL.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that they're not used to having Jax being like early rotated and just being blind picked. This is not
Yeah.
something that I think a lot of EU teams are used to.
There's also just play issues that are not purely theoretical or champion pool
Yeah.
here. I mean, when you look at the Barons and they're going to the back of the Barons bit, they'll kind of set themselves up for a giant AoE.
I mean, I agree.
Bro.
Spiky spike.
Then yeah.
Yeah.
And they talked about themselves in the interviews afterwards. This is a team that gets so excited when they're playing League of Legends that sometimes, they lose their way, especially in early high pressure games.
And I mean, I give G2 a lot of credit for being able to come back in those games, after having made mistakes. And that's why I put them on the level of those teams, right? Because I do think they're really good. To me, that is like a big compliment to say you're on the level of those teams. But I just think that those, like both Weibo and DK, to me, I thought were a step below the other Asian teams. And I felt like against those other Asian teams, if you make those similar mistakes, I don't think you get to come back.
Sure, and I think that's fair. But then my question would be like, what does KT do that you think makes them going into a G2 matchup stronger than a G2 would be, that KT would be tied as favorites? Because I wouldn't come in with a clear favorite in mind if G2 was to play against KT. And I agree with you on the LNG point that if it was G2 LNG, I would put LNG as the favorites. I think that is fair.
I would agree G2 would be the favorite against KT.
But I don't know if I would be confident enough to say that. Oh, I see what you are. That's clever. But like, I guess to me, like, KT hasn't shown anything in particular that super impresses me about this group. Like, I think that the way in which they played against BO, like their D+ game was.
Yeah, that's what I meant as well. I don't think you ever said
I'm just saying like 60-40, right?
Yep.
Like I would give 60-40 or thereabouts, right? Like G2 could definitely beat those teams, but I'm favoring them, right? So it's like, again, like I don't want it to be made out like G2 can't win. I think G2 are a really good team. I think they could win, but I think that this is like, I would if I had to bet, I would bet all those other teams would be more likely to win.
Completely reasonable.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But it's like, as far as KT, I think BDD has been playing amazing. I think this team is flexible. I think that they do team fight really well. I think they've had sloppy games too. Like, they're not a perfect team by any means, but I do think I actually personally felt like their best game was probably their game against PLG. I just think PLG is.
I mean, a lot of players have been pretty lackluster on the Kai'Sa, but
Yeah, it's pretty good.
still
at that.
got it, so that could be a huge advantage if Xayah becomes permaban.
I think.
And Cuz is super underrated, I think.
That's a
Cuz,
big
and Cuz has been incredible this year, especially. Because we've seen him on the world stage before, and it's been like, I mean, the very, very famous disappointment was that Longzhu team, right? And Cuz was a factor there. Like, and you spend time on T1, and you go to T1 as a jungler, you're a punching bag. That's basically how that one goes. So Cuz has been
Great year, BDD had a great year. Like, I think this.
And Team sort of escaped purgatory, gets to KT, and all of these players are all reinvigorated after what were difficult years last year as well. So the KT story is really, really beautiful. Especially, BDD had the worst time ever on Nongshim. Like, that roster, they shelled out so much money for this team that just didn't click. It just didn't work.
I think it's kind of unfair that they get a lot of extra hate because of the All-Pro thing and then getting full role All-Pro. But that's not their fault.
They played really well.
Yeah,
they were really good.
But that invites so much memery and criticism, that
Yeah.
I was curious, like, if you guys thought, is it Azel's comment kind of made me think that when I look at the 2-1 teams, BLG have looked the cleanest.
I think BLG have maybe been, I don't know.
Because it's hard to
I
say because
feel
both
like-
BLG and LNG lost to JDG, right? Which is kind of like it. But so in my head, I was sitting there thinking that like in this group, I guess like if you really wanted to, you could find like poor performances or like criticisms of each of them, while also each of them having like really strong performances. So I was like, that's why I think that this group is super interesting, just because it's hard for me to fully assess like, oh, what version of these teams, especially after a small break, right? Because now they actually get a few days to prep. How will they look? But I was, my assessment initially, and maybe it's wrong, but that BLG kind of coming to this group is like, would I rate BLG the highest
I
in this
would.
group of 6?
I for sure would, but
I think you guys are
also-
underrating LNG.
Yeah, I think I'm LNG. just
LNG
because
looked
they,
way better against JDG
and they
than
went
BLG
3
did.
games against JDG. And
Well, it's
like,
only
that's
one game
very
versus 3,
different.
right?
It is, but like BLG got kind of pretty clapped in
I
that
just
game.
feel like it's so easy to fall under the spell of like Ben's star power. He's been an absolute demon. Meanwhile, Scout doesn't get as much credit.
No, do you know what I've seen?
Okay,
about
but doesn't he?
Scout
I feel like
is
everyone
he
rates
built
Scout
the
really
wrong
highly,
items.
doesn't they?
He built the
It's like-
wrong items on Ari. He's terrible. You know that's what I saw
Yeah, I
because like he had the
First-
game on his shoulders in that last JDG match, and everyone's like, "Well, he built Zonya's second, so that team sucks." I'm like, "What?"
I think if what you said was true coming into the tournament, but now I think at the tournament, everyone is singing Scout's praises all
Because
the
of
time.
the
Yeah,
first
right.
2 days, first 2 days of his year,
Yeah.
he was literally the best performing player of the whole tournament.
Pre-tournament, there probably wasn't as much talk about him outside of people who watched LPL a lot because there's just bigger names. I feel like it's weird to say that, but I do think people talk way more about Jovi, about Knight, about Baker. You know, these guys. You know, you can caps obviously from a Western point of view, but I don't think people are underrating him now for sure.
I mean, there's a few like world champion MVPs that are here at this tournament. Scout is one of them, and we have to remember that.
It's
Like
just-
we've been singing Canyon's praises, understandably, you know. But like Kingan's not here unfortunately, so we don't get him from last year. But Scout definitely
I
is
mean,
up there.
Scrim data is also kind of influences it, and a couple of different NA teams have had like reported pretty good, at least single instances of good scrims versus
LPL.
LNG specifically too. And so that perception kind of influences it, but I always get drawn into scrim stuff, and very rarely, if ever, even plays out like that. And
I heard-
there's always a question of like, how serious is your particular opponent even taking a scrim, and how hard are they really trying?
I heard a lot of teams in the lead up to Swiss saying that they were beating LPL and getting clapped by LCK, and then LPL came out and just was winning everything.
Yeah.
About your earlier comment, but like, I feel LNG being underrated.
Yeah.
My personal bias is towards BLG, only because I feel like they just. Well, it's not just like it's just that when they start the game, I feel like that they're way more proactive than LNG is.
They are.
Yeah,
My
LNG is the
opinion,
slow LPL.
my opinion on LNG is that they're a very reactive team. I was genuinely so impressed with how they played against Fnatic. Like the thing that like really blew my mind was there's this control ward in the bot river that Razak was just clearing, and
Yeah.
he gets killed. And he doesn't just get killed; he gets collapsed on by 3 members, almost instantly. And the way in which LNG do that, it's not just a one-off; it happens all the time.
They punish
right?
mistakes like that.
And, like it's insane how aware they are. It's like their eyes are always on the move, you know? And like that to me is what makes LNG an incredible team. But then in my head the problem is like, well, then you're reliant on the opponent to do something for you to then be proactive on the map. or
But
for
they
you to
set
actually gain
traps, like they
control.
set traps and they put you in those situations.
And they
LNG
play
are
around objectives
really,
heavily.
yeah, and they're really, really good at making sure that there's no good place for you to go.
And I don't disagree with that. My opinion just leans more towards the BLG style of play.
It's way more sexy. It's just
Well,
looks
I
good.
mean,
It's
I
just
guess
this.
it
It's
is.
not wrong.
It just is.
But I just feel like that
It
from
turns you
start
on,
to
doesn't it?
finish, BLG is just way more dominant and like
Ben
they're-
Gasante?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I guess like, but I think it's fair to say that they're both very, very similar in power. I guess my bias puts BLG above
So
LNG for me.
Here's the thing. I just think that more proactive teams have been kind of dominating for a while now. But watching LNG, it's not a one-to-one, but it kind of takes me back to the old era. You know, pre site zoning, jungle changes, and all this sort of stuff. where it was teams that would play more slowly. You'd play against T1, right? And T1 would go in there, and maybe you'd even be in a kill lead, right? And you'd be like, okay, our team's doing pretty well. We're winning some skirmishes. We're winning some skirmishes. But every time you get a kill, you look at the mini map and they're taking your tower. Every time you get a kill, you look up, they just took the dragon. They just invaded your jungle. They just warded up around there. You know, like they always are doing something, and that's how I look at LNG. And I think LNG is so smart about when and where they take fights.